Hello, Internet. This is Matthew, and welcome to the Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse. This is not, as you might suppose, a podcast on surviving the zombie apocalypse. At that point, all hope is lost, and you should run into the horde of zombies. No, this is a podcast in which a variety of subjects will be examined, using philosophy in the hopes of gaining greater insight and perspective. This podcast won't solve all your problems, but it will make you think. Your mileage may vary, normies not allowed. On today's episode, I have a discussion with my friend, Karl Nord, on the 10th essay in the Federalist Papers. This was written by James Madison in regards to man's tendency towards factionalism, and why, in Madison's view, the U.S. Constitution is a bulwark against that tendency. So Karl and I discuss how well that argument holds up today, the false dichotomy of individualism versus collectivism. Karl Nord sprinkled in a little French literature there as well, and a lot more. So, without further ado, here's Karl.
Got it. Recording in progress.
So, I guess what most struck you, or do you want to just jump right into it? Or?
Yeah, I have a polemic. We'll start with a polemic about the paper, and that Madison gives a clear normative statement about how to fix problems with democracy. And I'll just read them. In the first place, it is to be remarked that however small the republic may be, the representatives must be raised to a certain number in order to guard against the cabals of the few, and that however large it may be, they must be limited to a certain number in order to guard against the confusion of a multitude, right? So he's saying that there's a proper ratio between the number of representatives in a state and the number of people. And I'd just like to read some numbers about what's changed since the Republic was founded. For the first Congress in 1780, there were 26 senators and 65 members of the House for a population of about 4 million. In 2020, there are 100 senators and 435 members of the House for a population of 330 million people. So if we were to discuss these in terms of ratios, then you had one senator for about 150,000 people, one member of the House for about 60,000 people, and today you have one senator per 3.3 million people, and one member of the House per 758,000 people. So if we assume that the founding fathers intended for the particular ratio that they had, and that is the proper ratio of representatives to people, then we can say we've become much less democratic. In fact, in the ratio for senators is 21 times less, and for the House it's 12 times less. Now, obviously, like we roughly like 2.5 the amount of voters, with giving blacks the right to vote, giving non-landowning people the right to vote, and giving women the right to vote, right? So maybe it's not 21 times, maybe it's 10, right? I don't know, but it's just a generalization. So in the discussion of the Federalist paper, number 10, I think he's discussing faction, and he's discussing the problem between the elites in the government and the people, or any kind of faction. And I think his criticism to this day is really perfect. I don't know. What do you think about my polemic?
I mean, I think that's a very astute observation. I think I went into this essay probably somewhat skeptical of Madison because I probably would, my ideal society, my utopia would be probably more democratic than I think the founding fathers would ever have been comfortable with. But I'm really trying to, I'm really trying to contend with the critics of democracy. If you're going to defend democracy, if you're going to if you're going to defend that on the basis of principle, then you have to unpack, I guess, why people are critical of it, and all the functional problems with it. And I guess what most struck me.
Can I interrupt you? What's really funny is he starts the paper discussing that. He says that he's actually saying exactly what you're saying. Let me get the exact quote. He literally says what you just said. The friend of popular governments never finds himself so much alarmed for their character and fate as when he contemplates their propensity to this dangerous vice. Blah, blah, blah. As they continue to be the favorite and fruitful topics from which the adversaries to liberty derive their most specious declamations, right? Anyway, it's in the first paragraph. Sorry, go
on. Well, so what most struck me was he was sort of remember a conversation I had with our mutual friend Keegan. And I remember he made an offhand comment about, because I said something about, I thought my ideal society was small. And Keegan said, well, everyone's ideal society is small. But Madison sort of like turning that argument on its head. He's saying, well, no, the issue with, small societies, and a small society is really where it's really the only possible way of having direct democracy that would have, factions would run amok, according to Madison, and the way to get around those factions is to increase the size.
I thought he was wrong on this too. You think he's directly wrong here? Well, let me give my argument. I think Madison overestimates the value of a large faction over a small one. The large one, or a large state over a small state. The large state will have its own factions as well, but they'll take time to form. Madison was living in an age where the federal factions had not become solid. Eventually, they would become solid, causing the Civil War, right? So,
I mean, I don't think it's true. It might have been true when he wrote it. I mean, I think the states were able to maintain. The federal government was able to maintain a certain stability and control over, the colonies up until around the Civil War, and then after the Civil War, is when the federal government really strengthened its control, and state power sort of. I mean, there's still, I guess, on the books the idea of states' rights, but it's far less meaningful now than it ever was, in the sense that, like, a state could pass legislation against, could legalize marijuana. But tomorrow, if the federal government decides, nope, marijuana is illegal everywhere, no questions asked, then that state has to rescind that law. So nowadays, I think the prevalence of factions in the federal government is far more than Madison might have predicted. It's far greater than Madison ever predicted. He seemed to. I mean, he's obviously like very mistrustful of the people here, whatever that. He's very mistrustful of the majority.
Before we move on, I want to make a little point that Madison is correct that even in our current day, we could address issues by unifying in a way that we can't when we're not. Like if we had a dictatorship in the UN, we could tackle climate change. Now, I'm not going to say that's a good idea, but you could, right? Anyway, sorry, go on.
I sort of see Madison's argument as, I guess, anti-democratic in the sense that, well, he does distinguish, and I guess most political scientists do distinguish between republics and democracies. Now, republics are a kind of democracy, but it's the kind that's slightly removed since you're voting for someone who's going to vote for your interests, supposedly. But he's definitely against the idea of the average person just going to an assembly and voting on, this law, then, being on a jury to decide the law, or being a judge to decide the meaning of the law. Like he's very suspicious of that ideal of democracy. And so he's really relying on the idea of, wise rulers, a small group of wise rulers who won't, become
Beholden to
who won't
faction.
develop factions.
Yeah.
Well, but one, I mean, obviously, the people ruling us now aren't wise. So maybe that's the reason.
I think they're beholden to faction. Anyway,
they exactly are. That's my point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. The
he has a really beautiful quote about the relationship between wisdom and selfishness. Let me find it.
I mean, while you're looking for that,
sorry, go on. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Oh, here I found it. Sorry.
Okay.
As long as the connection subsists between his reason and his self-love, his opinions and his passions will have a reciprocal influence on each other, and the former will be objects to which the latter will attach themselves.
That was the sentence that solidified Madison's Enlightenment view for me. Like that sentence is pure.
Yeah.
That sentence is pure enlightenment, if you ask me. I don't know if there's a sentence that's more enlightenment than that.
Well, like that's a statement on the necessary. I guess I would say it's not for me, because that's a statement on the necessity of like the limits of reason. That's actually a statement on how reason is always corrupt, because there's always this relationship between man's self-love and his wisdom, right?
So I actually think the most Enlightenment philosophers were very critical of reason. I think
okay, that's fair.
We sort of have a caricature of the Enlightenment, which is a reason with a capital R that will never fail us. But I almost think this is like a product of the 19th and 20th century, like positivism. So this view of the Enlightenment, or like the critics of the Enlightenment, are sort of
okay.
They're throwing rocks.
We made our dad a caricature so we could criticize dad. Yeah, no, I totally agree. But if you look at Kant's essay on what is enlightenment, he does say that everyone can escape knowledge. Like he is. I don't know. I think he is making the statement that we can all hop over the ditch. And like, Madison doesn't think that's true. I don't think it's true. I mean, most people probably didn't even think it was true back then.
Well, that's why I think, so the founding fathers, like, I guess, connection to the intellectual fermentation of the 18th century is very interesting, because I mean, I do see America as the embodiment of a certain kind of enlightenment, or the embodiment of a few select values of the Enlightenment. The fact that anyone would consider greater level of freedom of speech, or greater level of meritocracy, or greater level of freedom of religion, it's sort of insane. It would have been insane to the average person, I think, in the 18th century. Now we just take it for granted because this country has existed for a couple hundred years now.
Well, hold on. What do you think of the idea that I pointed out in the beginning, that we're actually less democratic than we were back then?
I can't say. That's a good question.
So I guess I see. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I see Madison and you is on the same team here, whereas like I'm actually on team. It's way worse than, like, everything is way worse. Let me give a little rant.
I don't actually think I am on the same team as Madison, but I think I'm able to, I guess, properly put in its context the revolutionary aspects of the American Revolution. Now, I think what quickly happened is we actually became pretty counter-revolutionary or conservative, because that's what happens after the revolution. There's some quote, I forget who said it, but the day after the revolution, the revolutionary becomes conservative, and that's what happened once the American revolutionaries consolidated power. Then I think that revolutionary spirit sort of became, it was gotten rid of. I mean,
well, I think it was suppressed, and that it manifested in all of those people breaking the laws against settling out west. Like there's all these laws against like someone like is it Daniel Boone? Oh my god, I'm gonna mess up my American history. Yeah, anyway, all those initial settlers were illegal. It was illegal to go settle on the Indian lands. And none of the elites in Washington and on the East Coast thought it was a good idea that we were making trouble down in Georgia. But, hey, fuck them, let's go take their land, Yeah, anyway.
So I guess to answer your earlier question, I guess I'd put it to you like this. I think we are more democratic, but we have never been very democratic. like we're only marginally more democratic than we ever were.
Okay.
Only, in many ways, again, going back to Madison, I think this country has always been pretty anti-democratic, and very suspicious of mob rule and tyranny of majority.
Yeah.
So we've only become marginally democratic, I guess, in the sense that, as I think you said earlier, it's like now, it's not just property owning white males that can vote. It's other people.
Property owning women could vote when it was just property, right? That's the cute thing, right? Right. So that's the cute libertarian quip. But I mean, I feel like objectively I'm right though. Like, so what are you using as a metric to say we're more democratic?
The people have more of an ability nowadays to, like, the average person has more of the ability, I guess, to get involved in a way that most people didn't back then. It's a very minor form of it. So this is why it's like, I think people have some influence on the government. I don't think it's totally hopeless, but I think the influence is still marginal and relatively minor.
Well, you're absolutely right that like someone living on the frontier of Kentucky who wouldn't even vote, right? Even if they owned property, probably, and that they would have no care or interest in politics, and that it was all external to them, right? It was something that other people did. And I think a lot of Americans still have that feeling, but that they're, as a proportion, it's less. And that's because there's not an avenue for all of that proletariat energy in Manifest Destiny, right? Which is actually people power, right? Like you going and settling land and taking from nature, and no one else is going to tell you what to do, is like people power, right? And yeah, I guess that energy has been directed inwards since since we reached the West Coast, and hey, you can move out to Montana or Alaska if you want to be alone, but
I think there's a pointed side to your polemic, and that is this: even though people have a greater ability to get involved, at least there's more resources and more education. I think people have never felt less involved. They've never felt more marginalized than now. There's just this overall like cloud of hopelessness and impotence that I think I sort of sense from the average people. I mean, not to say, I mean, people get on with their lives, they have a good time, They go to parties, they go to bars, they have their careers, they have family and friends, and most people try to make as best of a life for themselves as they can, but it's still rooted in, well, I can't change the world, so I'm stuck with doing little things in my microcosm. I'm stuck with doing little things, like changing my appearance or changing my career or whatever, because the world external to me is so beyond my comprehension, and so, or I'm so small, that what I do politically doesn't matter. And in that sense, I guess we are less democratic. There was more a sense among at least the people participating in the founding, when the country was founded, that they should be participating. It was just the people that were able to participate was a smaller number. If you understand the distinction I'm trying to say.
I agree. No, I don't have any criticism. I had something, it kind of went away though. Anyway, well, let's move on to the next point then. Maybe it'll come back to me. So I think the main, the essence of the essay is the following statement. In a contest between factions, the public good is often disregarded, right? There is this sense of the public good, right? And of like what is good for America. And he goes on to, this is another big point. There are two methods of removing the causes of faction. The one, by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence. The other, by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, and the same interests. Now, I think giving every citizen the same passions, the same opinions, and the same interests is actually a manifestation of trying to come to an agreement about what the public good even is, because people don't agree, because actually they have a hard time seeing outside of their class, their race, their specific faction. They just have a hard time getting outside of this. Like whenever we discuss politics, you were talking about like the despair of people who do not have a political power, right? Well, this is the whole reason people believe in democracy, because it gives the allure of this idea that you could have people power, right? It's a manifestation of your class interest, right? So, and I'm using these like very communistic terminology, not because I'm a communist, but because it's perfectly correct. It is absolutely correct. Like Madison in this paper, and I think people should realize, he discusses class interest in a way which like today people on the right wouldn't even want to acknowledge. Like they'll just try to say we're all one people, right? They'll try to define the public good as including people who have a class interest, which like is actually opposed to the class interest of the poor, right? Where the poor are being immiserated by the tension between capitalism and human dignity, right? And the rich want to ignore this problem because, yeah, well, I don't care about suicide booths in Amazon or like a crying booth, right? Like, who cares about that, you know? Like, of course, the rich person doesn't give a shit. It's not in his class interest. Like, oh, those people are just too unhappy to exist. They better not exist, right? Like, if you can't find happiness in this like dystopian shithole, like you do not deserve to exist, right? And of course, there's this like natural tension, again, between the boundary of classes, right? So like, what is the, I guess I'll ask you, what is the, there's two questions. One, what is the public good? And two, what is the practical application of politics for the everyday man to getting the public good? And how does he do this without getting himself caught up in faction, right? Do you want me to repeat the questions? They're a little crazy.
Oh no, I heard the questions perfectly. Clearly.
Okay, good.
I mean, the public good, I guess I have to give a utilitarian response here, which is very un-Nietzschean of me. But I would say probably the maximum level of contentment for the maximum amount of individuals.
Okay. So you would sacrifice one person in a trolley problem for three, assuming yes. them of equal value. Okay, yeah.
And the practical application of politics for individuals. I mean, I think it having your voice heard and having the ability to pitch in, having the ability to do something with yourself beyond yourself, and having the ability to, like, you know, change the world in a minor way, that suits your, you know, your interests and the interests of those you care about. That's really what politics is, like what the practical use of politics is.
Okay, yeah. So
those answers might sound a little cynical and fascistic, but
no, they're not. No, they're not. They're not cynical. It's all about making a dent. I don't think that's fascistic at all. Like I forget which comedian it is, but he's like, yeah, all I'm doing is trying to make a teeny little dent in this like one little awful corner of the universe. Like, oh, okay. And then I'm done, right? It goes back to before we started, we were discussing Russian literature, and you live to die, like you're 10,000 days in the fire and you're out. So like, I don't know. I guess I don't have a response. I agree with you. I agree with each of your points. But
I don't know, like, so maybe to play like devil's advocate for myself or against myself for a second.
Oh yeah, go.
I think what would be hard, like, to convince. I think my answer of the public good could turn some people off, because then it gets a question of like, well, who are we sacrificing, or who doesn't matter, or who? I mean, I'm
that's the real problem, right? Well, there's a really good answer to this. I forget who it's, Nietzsche. But it's that when you start sacrificing people and profiting through sacrifice, you'll have to keep making more and more sacrifices of more and more people. And then you'll be left with nothing left in society, because all you've done is just take from one person and give to another person, right? So like, this is the problem with, I don't know, I suppose predatory behavior in general, right? Like, because you're in some sense, when in the trolley problem, when you flip the switch, you're in some sense acting as a predator on the one person, right? Like, you are choosing their death. Like, and this is why a lot of people who have a deontological approach to ethics will say, you cannot touch the lever. You can't participate in this death machine. Like, as soon as you participate, you've become dirtied, right? Which is true. Yeah, it's true. You like, if the one guy's family comes and kills you because you sacrificed him, well, then that's what you deserve. Like, Abraham Lincoln getting shot is not a big deal. He did get a lot of people killed, and there's a lot of people angry at him. Sorry, but if some dickhead wants to shoot him in the head, that's what happens. If you live by the sword, you should expect to die by the sword. Like, no one should be surprised that Stalin's doctor didn't give a shit about it, right? And like no one but does that mean that all of the things Stalin did were wrong? Now, Stalin was a brutal, evil dude, but you have to look at the deed itself and say, when you adopt a stance, it's actually in the French Revolution. The guys who brought out the guillotine were immediately killed after they started killing people. Now, were those people who brought out the guillotine first and killed the nobles, were they happy to die by the guillotine? They lived and died by the guillotine. Were they happy to do this? If the answer is yes, then, well, okay, I guess no one's upset, right? Except for the dead nobles, right? So I guess, so do you see a distinction between someone like you who is comfortable with making sacrifices and then someone else who maybe is not, right?
I mean, I suppose for lack of better phrasing, and I don't like to use the individualist collectivist dichotomy, because I think it sort of is a simplistic way of viewing things.
Yeah. But make your point.
But I think that's ultimately the distinction. I think there are. I don't think the individual is really what matters ultimately, in a lot of things. I think it's sort of the social body, social cohesion.
Mm-hmm. Plato's old school corporatist conception of humanity, that we're different organs, that we have different purposes. Yeah.
And I'm actually glad you brought up the French Revolution, because this is why I'm not inherently anti-revolutionary. I mean, in the current material conditions of the U.S., I don't think a revolution is going to happen anytime soon. But if like a revolution were to break out tomorrow, I wouldn't see that as inherently immoral. And the sacrifices, like the deaths that pile up in a revolution, that's not necessarily wrong. I mean, this is why I love, this is another very un-Nietzschean statement, but this is why I love like Robespierre's quote about the connection between virtue and terror, which I pulled it up right here. Virtue without which terror is destructive, terror without which virtue is impotent.
Say it again, slower. Sorry, I'm dumb.
Virtue without which terror is destructive, terror without which virtue is impotent. So it's not, you can't just be moral because in Robespierre saying like that. Basically, I think what he's saying is you're going to get pushed around, you're going to get sidelined, you're going to get crushed by people who are willing to use terror. But then he says terror, without the virtue is impotent, because then people just see you as, needlessly slaughtering, people, needlessly causing immense harm, for, I guess, your own personal, sadistic fantasies or whatever. And I think he's right. I can't come up with a good counter argument to his point there. I think sacrifices. I think human societies like are based upon sacrifices. I think, and this is why actually I don't know if you saw the last episode of Beyond Talking Points, but we were discussing the movie Martyrs. If anyone's seen that movie, it's considered one of the most, like, it's part of the new French extremism genre. Mm-hmm. It's considered like one of the most disturbing movies ever made. But I was sort of like thinking out loud on that episode regarding like, regarding the concept of martyr. And I think I used to be very like against that concept. But the more I thought about it, the more I considered that I think, if from nothing else, from the perspective of realpolitik, you have to be willing to like die by the sword. You have to be willing to like die for your principles.
Do. Yeah.
And you have to be willing to like crush the opposition. You have to like enact. You have to act out your will to power, and sometimes that is a brutal process. Sometimes it's a brutal process. But this is what I think like liberals don't understand. Like we can't all just get along. It's impossible. It's in fact that's anti-society. Society is about some groups being crushed and other ones not, attaining power. So this is why I think I'm sounding
well, then is that the public good? Because the public good suddenly doesn't include one set of people, right? So there's actually a reason why in World War One, or was it World War II? Anyway, how they would draft British units for infantry, they would draft one guy from each village. You know why they'd do this? So that they wouldn't kill everyone in one village if they went and drafted all the young men in one village, so that the load was spread equally, right? Because you're basically sending young men into a meat grinder and pointless death, right? At least in hindsight it looks that way. But sorry, I guess that's a response to you to how would you make sacrifices in a way which actually embodies the public good. Because naively you would say, well, wouldn't it be good for the young men in a community to fight together, right? But actually no, because they're all going to die. So, but the deaths in World War I are actually catastrophically higher than the deaths in like medieval military engagements, right? Like there's actually a lot less death in the medieval era during engagements because the fighting was really brutal for a small period. And then there was like, then one side ran away, and most of the men were actually killed running away rather than actually fighting, right? So I listened to a great historian talk about this, how like the military conflicts after like gunpowder became, or after the rifle became like really efficacious, is actually more similar to like super ancient warfare than it is to like the middle period when there was actually armor, right? Because armor actually means that a lot less young men die in battle. But so anyway, it's kind of a really cool point there. Sorry, go on. Or I don't know where we are now.
I mean, I don't see, my mind thinks very abstractly, so I'm like, one like area of my like political philosophy I guess I need to like better work out is how to like put my ideas in practice, which is always, I guess, the $1 million question.
Yeah.
But I guess I could put it, I guess I would say this: I think different people can sacrifice different things, or different people can be sacrificed in different ways. So not everyone should be sent off to the battlefield to die. Not every young man should be
No, it
sent
should
off
be
to the
voluntary
battlefield
if possible,
to
right?
die.
You should select from the voluntary people within society who have an interest in public change, and then give them the tools that they need to live their life in service, right? This is actually what it originally meant to be part of the clergy, right? You were making a sacrifice, right? You were acting in the public interest. Well, eventually, there's this, can I give a long rant?
You may.
Okay, all right. Because it ends with this game theoretic statement that kind of ties up everything. Okay. So it's coming back to the idea, in a contest between factions, the public good is often disregarded. The explicit violence of faction is always underlined by an implicit competition involving injustice. The implicit competition of factions is what naturally causes governments to perish, right? The natural enemies of liberty, i.e. monarchists, derive their power from this constant border pushing on the institution and cultural beliefs of society. I think Madison, at the outset, makes the mistake of not noting that liberty is also engaged in such border pushing. Further, that the state itself is a cultural institution with desires. For example, in the modern day, we see the interest of police unions in supporting qualified immunity, making it very hard to make individual police accountable for their actions. Similarly, you will see teachers' unions rebuffing democratic and legal avenues for removing sex offenders from their position as teachers. Sexual abuse scandals permeate all institutions in the modern era, right? From business to the Catholic Church to government, right? So there's a somewhat inexorable process whereby the stronger abuse the weaker. In this way, the left is somewhat correct in asserting the goofy claim that you can only be racist if you have power. Of course, there are more rules for the judge than there are for the defendant on the stand. The judge has more responsibility and more power, and so his speech, candor, and action is directed by a tighter set of rules. It's what it means to put on the robes. Unfortunately, on the left, particularly in the media, have used the necessity of power to be racist to exclude the speech of poor conservative whites, since conservatives are what the left's natural opponents are. Again, we see the rather inexorable abuse of a valid intellectual position by someone with more institutional power over a person without said institutional power. The Melian dialogue must have its due, right? Okay, so my point about game theory in this, maybe game theory makes it necessary that there are so many hawks and doves with respect to the possession of a power. If no one is abusing power, then no one will be defending against such abuse. And so the lack of abuse removes the necessity of defense. Consequently, there's a natural cycle between people taking advantage of an institution or its belief system and the halcyon plane of no predators. It is this interplay that negotiates a border. This is the natural implicit competition of factions that can lead to the destruction of government. So I guess what I'm saying is that in the various issues we've highlighted, even in the issue of martyrdom, there's a natural ratio between hawks and doves that negotiate a border, right? And like, so then, okay, so then we can naturally ask, how do we increase the cost of predatory behavior? Well, this implies that someone owns the game, i.e. that there is a sovereign. The judicial robes are so sacred precisely because they are symbolic of that sovereign, of the ownership of the law over man rather than man over the law. The only other way to increase the cost for predators is by making the prey self-aware and giving them tools to defend themselves on their own. You can see these two solutions in the libertarian and the left-winger and their responses. The libertarian believes in personal responsibility. The left-winger believes in the parental power of the state. Both solutions work, but they involve different trade-offs and costs. Freedom isn't free, right? Since libertarianism imposes such costs on the individual, it is naturally unpopular with the working class, right? However, we can curiously note that the political class on both the left and the right are friends to the notion of more parental government. Of course, they are in favor of expanding their authority. We are seeing Plato's natural progression of governments at play. The poor will vote themselves more bread, except that the oligarchs are actually giving more bread because it expands its ability to extract other value. So there's this rule when you're caring for the elderly, like I care for my grandmother who's 91. Don't do anything that they can do for themselves. That's the first rule. And that way they don't lose the capability and pride that goes with exerting ownership over their daily activities. Well, I think parents should learn the same lesson about their children, and government should learn this lesson about the citizens. If you truly care for someone, then they need to be strong enough to defend themselves, right? Because we are also a mix of hawk and dove in our own brains, right? Like this is actually a statement about our behavioral responses to problems, right? You can only turn the other cheek so much before you're being exploited. So you shouldn't care for someone unless there is no conceivable world in which they couldn't become the fishermen themselves, in which they couldn't learn how to fish. Yeah, I guess so. I guess one last point on this. The advancing power of the state is precisely the type of factionalism that we can be keen on. People do not want only to be liberated from too much government. They want to be liberated from the material necessities of existence. And so they want lots of government. It is only where government is tyrannical that we learn the necessities of enforcing the borders, confining it to its natural authority, rather than how it usurps man's struggle and pride in providing for himself. Sorry, that's my rant and my game theoretic conception of the problem. So I guess I agree with Madison fundamentally that you cannot fix this problem.
I also agree that, that you cannot fix this problem. This is why I was like, it's sort of like a little immature, like when I think about or I feel like George Washington was a little immature when he said well, not immature, but he was like, well, I'm against political parties. This country should not be founded on any political parties. I mean, again, like it's a nice idea, I guess, but the word immaturity came up for me, or not unrealistic. That's a far better word, unrealistic. I just think it's unrealistic for anyone to think that when a country is created that they're not like some parties or as you say, factions they're inevitably going to arise. I don't see any way.
Then the argument is that we should have a dictatorship of the proletariat, right?
Say that again.
Then the argument is that we should have a dictatorship of the proletariat, essentially that the Chinese got it right. That's the only way to argue practically for what Washington is saying, actually.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay. Yeah.
I think if Washington had been Mao, he would have done what Mao did. I know that's like deeply sacrilegious, but I actually think it's true. Like that on some level, you need the law to own man rather than man to own the law, right? So how do you do that? Like you actually have to have the judicial system own the entire state. Like, which is why you get some of these people running around with these, like they worship the judiciary. Well, yeah, they worship, and it's why it goes with worship of God. Like why the conservatives worship God and they worship the judiciary. Well, of course, because the judiciary is the manifestation of God's natural law if we're believing Aquinas, and therefore the law owns all of us. Like, it's also very Muslim, right? Like, submission to Allah, right? It's, and that's their concession. That's their conception of Sharia, right? Like, if you read Kitab.
Well, this is why I actually, so I've been doing research. Hopefully by the end of the month, I'll be participating in a debate about democracy versus monarchism.
Yeah.
And I've been doing research on that topic. And one of the points I think I've come to is for a democracy to be successful, you have to have, like, the rule of law has to be incredibly strong. You have to have almost like a reverence for the rule of law, for your laws,
Yep.
for people to want to participate, and for people to accept the rulings and accept the inevitable coercion that goes into any hierarchy or any collective. Once you don't have that, then
the state falls apart.
The state falls apart.
Yeah, you know what? I have this was exactly my critique of Kitab. And when I was reading Kitab, I was thinking, he was saying everyone just needs to submit to Sharia, and then we all live under the same law, and then we can all be free in that law. And I thought to myself, whose conception of Sharia? Because Kitab himself had a conception of Sharia that got him in trouble, right? So, and when you have two competing conceptions of the law, you have two competing factions that are inherently in material conflict. It's going to evolve into an outright. It's not just going to be an implicit, like, immaterial conflict where there's injustice and all sorts of tomfuckery. It's going to actually involve guns eventually, because you have two competing moral visions for society, right? Sorry, I don't know where you were going exactly, but I have a lot of thoughts on this subject too, because it's, I mean, I suppose everyone does who cares about it.
The other thing I thought about regarding your rant was the idea of, like, the state and paternalism.
Yeah.
Because I expect that, like, the state is almost inherently paternalistic, but that doesn't justify every single paternalist policy you could list. I mean, I still think that when it comes to alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, I personally at least can't really justify the state in saying, you're not allowed to drink this alcohol, you're not allowed to smoke these cigarettes. I think there comes a point where the state's paternalism becomes so absurd and really counterproductive. I mean, because people are gonna engage in debauchery basically no matter what you do. I have a
theory on this, okay? And it's that you shouldn't allow the public sale of tools to assist people with suicide. Why is this? Okay. Well, the reason for this is that suicide is an individual choice. And if you ban the public or the capitalistic giving and taking of this, then it forces the economy of that underground. Now, black markets function entirely on voluntary exchange. Like, they're actually a libertarian utopia. Like, when libertarians discuss, like, the black market in Venezuela, they get really excited because they get to see, like, this is how a free market actually works, right? So isn't totalitarianism great then? Because then we can see all these free markets. So my point about this, though, is that you ban the public sale of tools to assist suicide precisely because it is an individual decision, and you do not want any outside person helping that person commit suicide, right? So I guess that's my argument for because anything you list as debauchery, they're all forms of suicide, like slower or faster or more pleasant, right? Like, there's pleasant ways to kill yourself, right? Or more or less, right? And you could extend this towards I guess another one of my responses to your point, though, is my point about the elderly, and that you should never do something for someone that they can conceivably do for themselves, right? That they can learn. Because what you're doing is you're encouraging dependence, and that encourages weakness, and weakness encourages the state to fall too, right? You want strong people, you don't want weak people. And yeah, so I guess some of the you could make a libertarian argument both ways there. You could say that that people are not capable of not being drunks, and therefore that the state does have a paternal role since the people can't help themselves. And then you can make the inverse argument. You can say, well, the people can help themselves. They should fucking help themselves, and we should leave them alone. And if you can't help yourself, you're dead. Congratulations, right? And so it's actually the same argument with respect to the issue of gay rights. Rather bizarrely, you find out that, oh, well, are they born this way, right? If so, then we need to accept them, right? Well, are they not born this way? Can they change it? Can they become someone who can have children? Because that's fundamentally what it's about. There's a bunch of people who believe in having children, and they're being confronted with a group of people who don't believe in having children. And it's weird and distasteful, so they don't like it, right? It's this innate disgust reaction. So yeah, and if they can help it, well, then we should change them, right? We should force them to, it's fucking weird. Anyway, sorry, go on.
So yeah, well, this is sort of why I'm going to bring up healthcare in the U.S. and then wrap around to the idea of, I guess, individual responsibility versus the public good, because I mean I think my ideal would be more like something some of the social democracies in Europe have, which would be more of a government-run healthcare system. But I'm afraid that I don't think that will work in the United States because of our idea of, our commitment to individuality, or our commitment to individualism, and our commitment to personal responsibility. Because I think, I want to say it's Japan. Japan has one of the best universal healthcare systems in the world. But they also generally lead much healthier lives than Americans. And we sort of take the idea as Americans that, well, it's your body, your choice. So if you want to eat Big Macs all day and have a heart attack at 51, that's on you, nice knowing you. But if we allow that, level of personal choice, and then we adopt a universal healthcare system, well, then who's paying for that, that guy's healthcare when he collapses at 51? Taxpayers. So,
well, yeah, because we're naturally not collectivists, right? We're the least, because we are people of manifest destiny, of the frontier. We are naturally the least people. We're the least collectivist people, right? Whereas the Japanese are an ethno state with a deep history of collectivization, right? So yeah, of course, they're gonna have a more sane response to the whole thing.
But I've really come to the conclusion that I'm not entirely my own master. that my identity is not. I can't take credit or blame for my entire identity. I can take credit or be given blame for some parts of it. But and I realize, I guess someone might think this is sort of taking it to absurdity, but I am many things. I am an American. I am white. I am there's so many aspects about any one
the
individual.
hawk and the dove both live in you. The hawk and the dove both live in you, right? And with every issue, they're there, right? And sometimes when the devil and the angel are talking on your shoulders, you don't know which one is which.
You
it's like,
almost,
I don't
I mean,
know.
often you never do, often you don't
Conscious,
know.
my conscience is speaking to me. I don't know if this is a good idea or not. Fuck it, like,
And so that's why I'm like, I mean, even though I'm an American and like I think fundamentally I lead an individualist lifestyle, I've sort of been infected with
yeah.
it like everyone else. It philosophically, I'm not. I don't consider myself an individualist. Philosophically, I do consider myself a collectivist for, what I just mentioned. I'm not entirely my own. So I guess I'm sort of arguing against the libertarian point that my body is not entirely my own property. My
Well,
body is also the property of my community.
what makes me so crazy is that the conservatives think everyone is the property of God. They do. They sincerely believe that everyone is the property of the law, that you should submit to the law, and that everyone is God's child, right? This notion of am I not my brother's keeper on the left is the same thing, right? So everyone has these notions of ownership, but they refuse to make them clear and open because it's so delicate and it's so touchy, right? So the bonds of power or responsibility or ownership, right? It's really hard to talk about. They're actually sacred things, right? Like you go around questioning the value of the family in a conservative community, you're going to get kicked out, right? Just like you go around questioning the value of I don't know what to call their view of race, of abolitionism in general, and the left, and you'll get kicked out. Like of if you question the doctrine that we are all created equal, right? Which is a religious doctrine, right? So, and there's so much ownership in all of this. There's so much like I am not my own person, and then there's this like very clear current of like I'll just do what I want, of hedonism. And it's both on the right and the left. And I think this is just human nature, right? Like morality is a convenient thing for when I want it. And I'll dismiss it when it's not convenient. which has to do with faction, right? It's exactly what Madison is complaining about.
Yeah, I've been trying in my like worldview to, I guess, emphasize morality. Well, tell me if this is too much of an aside, but I've been trying to
No.
de-emphasize, I guess, my the moralistic element in my like worldview or character. I don't know if that's anti like collective. If a collectivist has to always speak as a moralist because of what they
No, I think they
value.
must. Yeah.
Because like for example, when I was talking about the need to be brutal sometimes, I wasn't really even thinking about it in terms of right or wrong. I was just thinking about it in terms of I have certain ideas or values and I will enact them out in the world as best I can and fight off the people who disagree with me as best I can.
Yeah,
So maybe
absolutely.
I'm contradicting myself, but
No, I don't think you are. I mean, so I guess always the question is, what is the public good actually, right? And as Madison points out, uh, we're never going to agree. So what do you do about this? You just have to, and this is I think it's a really good point. You just have to mitigate the effects of factionalism. That's all you can do. You can't get rid of it. You just mitigate its effects. And I think he has a practical point. I want to reiterate. It's the very first thing I talked about, but that there's a proper ratio between your representatives and you. And we are so far out of whack. We are so less democratic than we think we are. And I don't know what we would need to do to get back to that, right? But maybe we'll never will, right? I have no idea. So that's kind of I think there's an enduring practical point about that. Yeah, I don't know.
So actually, I'm curious to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So do you think? Oh, so I get. What's your opinion of like, the Michael Malice idea of like balkanization? Like, okay, people hate each other so much, Republicans and Democrats, that we have to create separate communities. And because basically, I think what the argument for balkanization is sort of trying to deal with the same problem of factionalism, right? But basically, it's making the opposite argument. Madison was saying we need a large country to decrease, factionalism. And the argument for balkanization nowadays is, well, no, the country's been so large, there's too much faction, there are too many factions, and so we need to decrease the scope of the community or of the nation, like basically break up into several nations, however many, to decrease balkanization, so everyone who can agree more and there can be more social cohesion. Do you think that's like at all a practical option, or do you think that's sort of a fantasy, or what?
I honestly don't know. So if I was to answer what do I think the biggest problems in America are, I think the biggest problem in America is education. I think the fact that we don't have an education system like the Germans is stupid. We should have quotas about how many people go into each industry. We should directly pay for people to go into industries which are needed. We should follow Turchin's advice and stop overproducing elites. Turchin is the smartest guy of our generation. If we're gonna listen up, we should listen up to him. I think that would go a long way towards healing America, because right now there are too many people with opinions, myself included, and most of what people need to do is just help their neighbor, actually. So that
it's like when Bo Burnham, I don't know if you watched that.
I haven't seen the new one. I don't like him. He fucking pisses me off. He's such a liberal, but
no, I mean there is a lot of
is he gay?
No, there's a lot of like political, like there's a lot of the new
he's
special.
He's too ironic. He's everything I hate about my generation. Like I love it. He's really political. Funny. In fact, there's super smart, super funny. I just haven't watched it out of spite.
Well, I brought it up because one of the rants in that special, he's like, the whole point of it is, can anyone just shut the fuck up? He's like, do we all have to get our opinion in right now, to the whole world, or can some of us just shut the fuck up?
But the problem is that he should shut the fuck up. This is why I hate my generation, because everything is like that. It's just like, oh, I'm so ironic, but I'm doing the thing that I'm complaining about. It's like, yeah, well, then
excusing hypocrisy, saying it's justifying hypocrisy by saying, I know I'm a hypocrite, therefore.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy.
But like I think I interrupted you. I was just drawing the connection between, people, or between what you were saying about, people just need to help their neighbor, and you said there are too many opinions out there. Yeah, and they just need to help their neighbor. And you just reminded me of that Bo Burnham quote.
Yeah, and if you're your neighbor and you're asking for help, you should pay the kid down the street to do something. Okay, so it goes both ways. You need to help your neighbor, and your neighbor needs to help you. Like when the Amish get together and build a barn, which is like this amazing thing that like city people are just like, what? They just get together and they all build a barn. Oh my God. It's amazing. It's amazing that there's this collective communal spirit, and you realize that the degradation of social bonds is a direct consequence of the way we live. So yeah, I guess I'm in favor of deurbanization. I'm in favor of fixing the education system, busting up the monopoly. I'm in favor of workfare. I think workfare would go a long way. I think we should have the government be an employer of last resort. And I think having businesses being too big to fail, but not people being too small to fail, is fucking crazy. I mean, everybody knows that, but like that's a proletariat issue that I'm pretty sure all conservatives and all liberals who are actually working class idiots like me, no, we know this. Like we know that it would be good if the government stopped bailing out these giant blood-sucking corporations, and if they started just, bailing out idiots, and like not giving them like, the moon, but just enough, right? I don't know. That's so. Do I think that? Sorry.
No, I interrupted you.
No. So do I think that America is healable? Yeah, but like it would involve that, like the stuff I'm talking about, in my opinion, because I think fundamentally there's these delusions on both the left and the right about manifesting their personal tyrannical power of their faction. And when the poor advocate for UBI, they don't realize that's tyrannical. The fact that you don't work means you're rent seeking, you're engaging in rent seeking behavior, just like the rich are engaged. Everyone wants a cash cow. They're trying to milk each other. It's like, oh yeah, fuck that guy over so I can milk him. It's fucked up, man. Like, it's so fucked up. Like, you shouldn't be milking your fellow man. Like, that's actually what being your brother's keeper means. It's like it's like enslaving men through paternity. Like, I'm sorry, but like, you don't get to get a check every month because you decided to have a kid. It's your body. It was your choice to have the kid. Like the fact that men don't get paper abortions, it's just obvious that we live in a sexist society that favors women's reproductive rights, maybe with some good reason. But hey, man, like, if you don't think that like all of these men running around who are borderline suicidal and are now serfs because of how we've like treated them as second-class citizens, and now like there's all this shit against white men, it's like, what the fuck, man? Like, most white men are dirt poor dirt bags, like, we're idiots. And like, just because Josie got pregnant when I had my 10 seconds of glory doesn't mean that I should spend the rest of my life in fucking, servitude, and I don't even get to see the stupid kid, right? So, there's that issue too, right? There's all of these factionalist issues. And if we actually believe in the public good, and we actually believe in the whole society moving together in a harmonious fashion, again, I think the Chinese are just ahead of us. They have this concept of social harmony that we just don't have. Like, we don't have a concept of social harmony. Like, this is so important in every issue ever in an urban society. Like, social harmony is everything. Like, I don't know, man. That's I guess that's my rant on bullshit. That's all bullshit opinions, Anyway.
Well, this is why I like listening to Breaking Points with Crystal and Sagar. If you listen to their work,
no, I don't.
Well, I haven't listened to a lot of political podcasts recently, and I don't recommend it. It's a good way to get depressed. But the whole point of their show is basically that the left and the right, or that the populist left and the populist right, should be uniting on economic issues, even if they don't agree on social issues, because we can all agree that crony capitalism, we all should be able to agree that crony capitalism is antisocial and destructive to our own interests. And it only serves the interest of a small minority.
Absolutely.
Of a small faction, if you will.
Yeah, it is a small faction. And we should call it state capitalism, because both the left and the right use that terminology. Call it state capitalism. Never stop calling it state capitalism. Don't call it laissez-faire. Don't call it crony capitalism. It's state capitalism. Because, yeah, you're absolutely, there's 100% agreement on this, actually. Like, and yeah, I actually think it's the way to move forward with that. But then again, I don't despair, because I'm just making a little dent. Like, I'll have my 10,000 days in the fire and I'll be done, right? And, that's all you can do. You don't have to do anymore. You don't have to fix, you're not Atlas. You don't get to shrug. Like, you don't have this mammoth burden. No, you don't. You actually are standing on the shoulders of everyone else who died before you, and you just have to die in a way which it gives to your fellow man what he deserves, right? Right. And that's not that hard, actually. It's actually very easy. So there's serendipity in that, and yeah, but I guess that's why I don't listen to a lot of politics anymore. Like, I love something old like Madison's opinions on faction, because I think, or like if you like the Confucius, the Great Learning, like I read that and I was like, oh my God, this is like how do we not have this at the core of our civilization, But like, hey. But you were going to interrupt me a couple times. What were you going to interrupt me with?
I guess what I was going to say was, I'm so like the reason for titling my podcast "The Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse." It's like it sort of has two meanings. I mean, one is sort of does exemplify what I said earlier, is this sense of despair that I sense in particularly younger people, people my age. I don't sense like the stereotype is that young people are lazy, and actually people in their like early teens and 20s and even early 30s, I don't even sense I don't get the sense that most of them are lazy. I get the sense most of them do work and do go to school and do the things that's expected
that's just
of them.
Generational bullying.
But
your generation is always paranoid that it's losing its power and it's bullying the younger generation. There's totally generational bullying. It goes both ways. Like we call boomers, and like that's bullying, man. Like I don't know. Like I'm not going to engage in that behavior. Like I remember the first time I told someone, "Oh, you'll understand when you're older." Like I actually said that. I remember hearing that as a kid and getting enraged. Like, what, you don't believe in the power of reason? Like you're not able to like teach me right now the meaning of what is being said. But no, actually the meaning of that phrase is, oh, you just haven't suffered enough, asshole. Like you just haven't suffered it. You don't know yet because you haven't like gone through the come to Jesus moment where you're like, hey, I exist, and a large portion of that is just going to be suffering, Anyway, sorry.
But even though I don't think people my age are lazy, I still get that sense of I'm, an insignificant, pebble in a beach, and I don't matter. So why should I try to do anything, or why should I try to change the world? But the other like meaning of the, the title for my podcast is ironic because of what you said. I don't.
Yeah.
I joke about being a doomer. I joke about like, oh, the end is nigh. But it's I'm actually, I like to think, fairly optimistic because I'm not concerned with, because I don't expect myself or my family or my friends to be that great man that changes history. You don't, and because you don't have to expect that of yourself, you don't have to expect that of others. There's nothing, and it's honorable, in fact, I think, to make a dent. That's all. On my deathbed, that's all I want to know. I made a dent. That's all I care about.
What does it mean to be Christian? To imitate Christ, right? That's all it means. And like, I mean, yeah, it's following the great commandment, but like, which is to love your neighbor, will love God and love your neighbor, right, as yourself. But yeah, I don't know. I think, I don't know. I think that's part of like our identity, in that there's a lot of struggling people have to get away from this like Christian mythos, when like it doesn't matter that it's Christian. It's just a mythos. It's a mythos about suffering and getting up on the cross and really not have done much, but you died. There's this phrase, that's a weird hill to die on, but at least you're dead. And it's kind of how Jesus was, man. Like, what did he really do? Not much. I mean, I guess, he said some parables and stuff and did some miracles, but I don't know. I don't actually think he did miracles. Just
well, to connect back to my earlier little militant rant that will certainly get me on the FBI watch list.
I mean, say that if you want to be on the watch list. Like, hey, watch me. Hey, woo.
The issue with that is, or the issue with modern Christians. I'm quoting Kierkegaard. I think I've told you this quote before.
Hitchens?
The issue with, sorry.
Did you say Hitchens quote? Sorry.
Sorry, Kierkegaard quote.
Oh, Kierkegaard. Okay.
The issue with Christians is they don't burn people at the cross anymore.
Yeah, that's. They don't burn themselves.
They don't burn themselves, right? Because I mean, I'm not a Christian, but I guess the best thing I think you can take away from Christianity, or the best thing you can take away from a mythos is the pro-social element.
Yes.
And I consider myself, I try to lead a very pro-social life, because I think that's how you make a dent, is to be pro-social.
Yeah.
And I think the mythos of individuality sort of generally leads to antisocial behavior, yes. Like suicide, like drugs, and then you're just at the best case scenario, you're causing your own suffering. But generally, like worst case scenario, and this is usually how it is, not only are you suffering in that moment by drinking yourself to death, your family is suffering, your friends are suffering, they're watching you slowly deteriorate into nothing. And so you have as much responsibility to those around you as you do to yourself. But you have to and again, you have to be willing to put yourself out there. You have to be willing to die on on the pro-social hill, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to sacrifice yourself on that pro-social hill. And that's not a call to arms, but it's a.
Yeah, it is. It's the inner jihad. Yeah, it is. It is. It's the inner jihad. I mean, that's actually the meaning of that. Like if Americans would read the people who are mad at them, it's good to read when someone hates you. It's good to actually just and they really hate you. Maybe just take a second, just see what they're saying. I think
it is a call to I guess it is a call to arms, but I'm I guess I'm a very non-confrontational person, and I'm also so I guess it's sort of part of my journey is to, I guess, confront my inner warrior, I guess, to be Jungian about it, to confront my own ability to be to be violent or to be aggressive, but in the right way. To know how to stand up, to know how to stand up for yourself, or to know how to stand up for your belief system, but in a way that's not just I mean, in a way that's just not destructive or antisocial.
Yeah, so I want to have a little polemic against something you said earlier, that individualism is bad. I think actually, and this goes to Aristotle's conception of the great-souled man, and that he's magnanimous, right? He has so much that his cup is overflowing with generosity. It's like Santa, okay? Santa is the picture of overflowing generosity. It's why we worship him. And the great-souled man is great as an individual, and he is also great in the collective. So being great individually and being great collectively are actually the same thing. So you do get pathological individualism and pathological altruism, right? These are real. They happen all the time, right? Misguided behaviors. But I think any opposition between individualism and collectivism, I think it's purely so superficial, because you cannot have a great collective without great individuals. And you just can't. You can't be a great individual and have no comparison in society to measure your greatness by. Like, you would have no, it doesn't, I don't know. That's, I guess, my challenge to anyone is that it's in our nature to be great in both ways. Sorry.
No, you're fine. But this is why I said earlier, I don't like that way of I don't like those qualifiers, because I mean, I'll call myself a collectivist, I guess, if I'm fighting against or arguing against the pathological individualism. But ultimately, I can't. I think, you know, in my overarching philosophy, I can't say I'm one or the other. I'm both, and we're all both, and that's sort of. I think some people would view that answer as a cop out, like you have to choose one or the other, and I don't see how you choose, because collectives are, you know, groups of individuals, but individuals are always parts of collectives, so they're inextricably linked. But I guess to use those words, to use that language is sort of difficult at times because of how people associate. You know, if people want to go after collectivism, they'll bring up the Cultural Revolution and say, look at how horrible, you know, look at the horrible things that collectivism led to. It led to all the deaths in the Cultural Revolution. Therefore, we should be purely individualistic. But that sort of, I think, misses the point.
Oh yeah, that's silly. You know, like I don't know. You think that China could have avoided the Cultural Revolution? I mean, like, man, that's a lot of free will I don't believe in. Like, I don't know if you want to end it there, or if there's maybe I should check if there's anything else I wanted to rant about. Did I say all of my favorite quotes from the paper?
I mean, I could rant for hours, so whenever you think is a good stopping point, I'll.
There was I know you said before the call that you found some of it funny, and I think there was a little quote here that I think is fucking hilarious. The union would stop, and this is where the quote starts, a rage for paper money, for an abolition of debts, for an equal division of property, or for any other improper or wicked project, will be less apt to pervade the whole body of the union than a particular member of it, in the same proportion as such a malady is likely to taint a particular county or district than an entire state. I don't know. Do you hate paper money? Do you hate the abolition of debts? Do you hate for the equal division of property? Madison has such a fucking beautifully old like view of, like, I don't know, libertarianism and like ideal government. And I think sometimes like modern libertarians can't even conceive of how different these people actually were. Like, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's sort of interesting because if you look at some of the writings of Madison or of Jefferson, some of their arguments, I mean, and this was like at the very beginning, like the founding of the U.S. was like just before and at the very beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So, but if you think about like what we consider pro and anti-capitalist nowadays, after, you know, in post-industrial society, and then you look at some of the arguments that some of the founders made, some of them sound similar to some of the anti-capitalist arguments you hear nowadays, but they're not associated with anti-capitalism because this was before a modern understanding, or before modern capitalism and before a modern understanding of it. So this is why I love how like Thomas Paine, who was probably, even though he was one of the most influential authors of his day, was probably one of the least influential founding fathers in terms of policy, because he like thought about things like, pre and postnatal care for women. They like the state running something like that, or the state running, an education system. Like it was, he was very, he was much more modern in a lot of his proposals for, solutions to certain social ills. And he was basically advocating, I guess, for what is now considered social democracy. And so but this is why I was saying earlier, like the revolutionary mentality in the American Revolution, I think, was ultimately snuffed out. And I guess where like I become somewhat uncomfortable with Madison's arguments is, I think, and where I become, uncomfortable with the founding fathers is, some of their arguments just sound way too aristocratic for me. They sound really, like they were, I mean, they couldn't really, even though America was like the, a new a country, and it was trying to like exemplify new values. A lot of the founders still had that like old world. They had an old world way of viewing things.
I mean, they act, yeah, they were aristocrats. They act how the liberals act today. Like they were sanctimonious douchebags. Yeah. Like, I mean, yeah, like that doesn't mean they can't be right, right? It's like Stalin can be right about something. So can this sanctimonious douchebag. Like it doesn't matter who says it, I don't know.
Well, I know. I fundamentally, I guess, I'm anti-aristocracy, so that's why when they kind of slip into aristocratic garb, even though we've never really had an aristocracy in the U.S. So, but maybe when they're more elitist, at the more elitist moments in their writings,
I think
or when I like kind of roll my eyes.
What's the difference between aristocracy and oligarchy to you?
I mean, a fairly superficial one. I mean, I guess aristocracy is more about like inherited titles, and oligarchy could be a little more dynamic in the sense that you don't necessarily have to inherit.
So oligarchy is better. Okay, that's cute. I really like that. So I think we have this is my argument from the beginning of the essay. We've been becoming way more oligarchical. And it's just natural. But superficially we've become more democratic. But that's just the dog and pony show. Like it's like, oh hey, look, you can vote. But we control the candidates, Like I'd love to have a German style parliamentary system where like third parties were viable. That would be cool. I don't know. Like there's all this like beautiful political science that's come out since the founding, and like first past the post stuff. Like, man, like there's so much good stuff. And you just realize, oh, the people in power don't want it, therefore we won't get it. Oh, okay, I'm done. Like doesn't matter to me. The oligarchs don't want it. That's fine.
Well, but like I said earlier, I think it's the fact that we're an oligarchy with democratic tendencies that makes us such an interesting model of government to study, because I think both the rise of Bernie Sanders and the rise of Donald Trump exemplify how the oligarchs aren't able to arrange all the, like, they're not able to control everything, and there are cracks in the system. Now, ultimately, Bernie was crushed, but Trump got through. And I mean, Trump is hated by the mainstream media and by many prominent Republicans and Democrats. And somehow he slipped through the cracks. So that really almost makes me hopeful. I mean, I've never been a supporter of Donald Trump, and I would never understand. I mean, I guess I understand why people voted for him, but I could never bring myself to vote for him. But I'm not that interested in the fact that we are an oligarchy. I mean, I think we are. That's not where the change, I guess, that's where I don't think that's where the change is going to come from. So
have you read Pareto's paper on the circulation of elites?
I have not.
It's on the use of force in society. Anyway, he explains exactly. There's actually some really good articles in the Guardian about this. It's by a Pareto scholar. I was so happy to see these arguments because like there are people on the left who still know this stuff, and it was about the circulation of elites, and Pareto describes exactly how Trump comes into existence. He's a turncoat elite who sides with a populist movement in order to seize power against an elite who is overplaying their hand, right? It is the exact mechanism by which it happens. And Pareto describes how this circulation of elite occurs, right? And he gives it some advice about how the elite should be constructed such that there is slower or faster circulation of elites as per is necessary to keep the system meritocratic, right? Because what happens is if you have too many elites, and this actually goes to Turchin, if you have too many elites that are not being allowed to circulate into the upper echelon, right, then it destabilizes the entire society, because then there's a secondary and competing vision of the law, right? Because the elites, the priest case, determine what the law is. And when you have two competing priest castes, what happens is that the system destabilizes. Anyway, Pareto is 100% on this too. We could have another podcast about Pareto. I'd love to talk about him. He's really good.
I mean, wouldn't it be possible though? This sounds very Leninist, but wouldn't it be possible for I guess I'm sort of making then the Caesarist case. Would it be possible to get a elite on our side or on your side in order to fight for your material interests?
No, that happens. That's what Trump was. He just wasn't a very good one. He's just crappy. That's all. He's just like, we wanted Caesar, and instead we got like Caesar in America in a fucking modern setting, which is craptastic Captain Trump, you know? Like, I mean, not everything Trump did was bad, but like, yeah, like, what do you want? Do you want Mark Cuban? Do you want, like, who's the head guy on Shark Tank? Mr. Wonderful. I forget his name. You want Barbara? Barbara from Shark Tank? Barbara's cool. I don't know if you've ever watched that show. I love that show. It's where dreams go and die.
Yeah, I guess that's probably a good place to end the discussion. Okay. I mean, there's so much more we could talk about. But
hold on. Last thing. What did you find funny in the paper? You said before we started the podcast something you found funny. Like, well, where were you laughing? I want the quote.
I should have had the quote pulled up. But it was about the, you know, the how your heart dictates your reasoning, how your passions.
Oh, the one I brought up.
The one you brought up.
Oh, I love that. That's my favorite part of the whole paper.
Well, I thought it was funny because that was what I mentioned earlier. That's when I like sort of thought of the essay as very 18th century bourgeois, very like I feel like one of the philosophers could have written that. Like I feel like Voltaire, Diderot could have written that sentence.
Oh yeah.
And it would have made
definitely.
And so it was just the recognition of, I guess, how the founding fathers were influenced by the French intellectuals.
Yeah, they definitely were.
The circulation of ideas and the way people are influenced by other people in interesting and dynamic ways. I mean, obviously, we were also very much influenced by English, you know, philosophers and jurists. I mean, the American founding fathers were basically in terms of their intellectual heritage, they were a weird mix of like English and French philosophy and law, which makes, which is probably where like what makes America such a strange and beautiful country.
I have no feelings about America. It could live or die, and I don't fucking care. So I guess that's my answer to earlier. Like, do I care? I don't know if I care about balkanization. Like there's a natural process of expansion and refinement in any social system, right? Like the social system expands, and then it gets too big, and then it has to refine itself, and it contracts. It just expands and contracts, and expands and contracts. It's like your bowels as it chews food.
Well,
like
this is sort of why I would say, like, if someone brings up balkanization as a solution, I would say that actually, I think what would happen post balkanization is there would be a period of re-centralization. There would be I don't think if America split up into 4 or 5 or 6 different countries, I actually think it would probably end up becoming one government again. I don't think, and I think this might be just a pattern of history of like a centralization, decentralization, more localism coming up, and then more nationalism or internationalism. Sort of
what do you think of the opinion that all of the Anglosphere is actually one nation? All of the English-speaking countries are actually one nation.
I don't think I've thought about that matter enough to really have an opinion of it.
Because I think on some level it's fucking true, and I use fucking because I want to be silly. Because I think that we are already moving to, like, all of the paranoia about globalization is true. Like, we're moving towards one state, and it's inevitable. It's inexorable. Just as you described, if we split into 5 different states in America, they would eventually reform in one state. Well, all of the English speaking in the countries in the world have the same culture, the same values, the same problems, the same craziness. And you could even expand it to nations which are like colonies, or whatever you want to call it. The colony isn't the right word, but I don't know what else to call them. They're English speaking adjacent, right? And like, so Russia and China aren't included, but they kind of are, right? Like, so, because what we're talking about is the conception of the public good. Like, all of these places have a shared conception of the public good. They somewhat view themselves as one people, right? And this is kind of what globalism is about. It's about viewing the world as one people. So I don't know. I guess that's kind of, and a lot of people hate this. They hate these facts, right? They want America to stay a nation. They don't want America to be part of some global system of control. Whereas I think, like, hey man, cat's out of the bag. Fucking League of Nations happened. That was the rough setting, and then we got the UN, and that's how it's gonna be. Like,
I'm actually not that worried about a world one government, because I actually think the globe is just really, there are too many factors for a world government to ever be stable. So I sort of view a world government as something that's probably, it's sort of just a fear that I don't think is really has much basis in the conditions of, I don't think it has much basis in material reality.
Okay, let me make an argument. If arguing on the internet with someone from America can get you in trouble in Australia, how does that work? Like, if you're an Australian citizen, you go on an American podcast and you say some shit. Like, doesn't that mean that, like, it's kind of stupid, I'm sorry, but doesn't that mean that, like, you're part of this, like, global system of control? Like, I kind of think 1984 is just like, it's gonna happen. Like, oh, okay, guys, it's just the destiny. Like try to move to a rural place and avoid this. Like, I just don't think it's avoidable. Like, we already
I think
live.
there is probably global control, and it's not any, it's not really even the politicians of any one country. It's sort of I think it's global finance.
Yeah, definitely.
And I specifically, when I say that, I'm specifically not making an anti-Semitic comment. I'm not saying, oh, it's the Jews.
I think you're being anti-Semitic by bringing up that you're not being anti-Semitic. No, it is. It's a global. The
financial the most public policy is based on the interests of Wall Street and the interests of multinational corporations. And so if there is a world government or like, a global control, that's where that's where I think it lies. Not so much, I guess, in an H.G. Wells type view of like one world government, like one, Congress that, people
there's no
from
God. There's no actual God. There's just like a dissociated amalgamation of material interests manifesting in a Machiavellian fashion, whereby there's more capital reaction and the people are more losing their dignity, right? Like, that's the reality. Like, if you want to put it in long form, silly sentences, yeah. Like, I don't know. I have no opinion.
That's the thing, is this podcast might be what the most outrageous I've been in my podcasts so far. So that's
Oh, good.
I think I've made the most outrageous comments in this episode alone than in any other episodes in my
Just
podcast
own
so
them.
far.
If someone thinks you're wrong, let them explain why, and then everyone can read it, because we actually do believe in the power of reason here. Like, oh my God, like, we believe in the power of reason. Like, I don't know if I'm wrong, I guess if I had like a goofy statement that I wanted to like double down on, I think it's my belief that there's a natural ratio of hawks and doves along any border, like people who trespass a border and people who respect a border, right? And this is like property rights. This is like some cultural holy cow, right? Like, sometimes the holy cows exist so that you can beat them, right? And then we call them like the whipping boy, or like the other, right? What's the name for the Jews during World War II? The scapegoat. Yeah, there we go. And yeah, like, sometimes like things exist to be trespassed against, right? Like, and I think this is why like homosexual culture is so funny, because it is subversive. It wants to subvert. It's just like obsessed with this like subversive behavior. And I wonder how much of like, maybe that's why there's so many geniuses among gay people, right? Because they're inherently subversive, so that they don't give a shit about your holy cow. They just want to fuck with it. And in doing the fucking, they find some interesting things, right? And that leads them to, I don't know, new ideas. Anyway.
I think one of the qualities of a great individual is the willingness to be subversive, is the willingness to disagree with experts or majority opinion, or make outrageous, make dark jokes or make outrageous comments about something. But as I said earlier, and I'm not trying to turn this episode into a psychoanalysis of my mind, but I'm just not like used to being confrontational. I'm not used to being outrageous. I'm a people pleaser.
Are you
inherently?
Maybe you're secretly not, though. Like, you're secretly like I just want to, like, it's like you're saying you're not, but you secretly are. I don't know. It's some kind of stupid bullshit.
I mean, there is a devil in me that likes to rile people up as well. So there's two conflicting.
Stirring the pot,
There's the part of me that says things to just mess with people, and then there's the part of me that like wants to get along with everyone and wants everyone to like me.
Yeah, so. But everyone liking you, isn't that like tyrannical? Like,
do
it's
you mean?
where's that? There's what movie is that from? Where like the witch is like, oh, it's Lord of the Rings when Galadriel is given the opportunity to have the ring of power, and she says like, and they will love and worship me as a god, right? And like you're like, whoa, this is like toxic, because I love Lord of the Rings because it's all about like manifesting like toxic power behavior around an object. It's like so good. Anyway.
No, it's a good. I mean, it's a good way to think about it. I suppose having people that dislike you, it's I guess it gives. I mean, it humbles you, or it gives you a sense of perspective, or it also gives you, something to argue with, some people to argue with, something to argue against.
Hey man, if someone murders you, then you're worth murdering.
See, this is why this podcast is going to get me on the FBI watch list.
See, put that at the beginning. If someone murders you, then you're worth murdering.